The Index podcast is brought to you by our staking partner, Marinade Finance. Their latest release, Marinade Select, offers a smarter way to stake, featuring a curated set of high-performing mid-size validators handpicked for yield, professionalism, and their role in making Solana faster and more resilient. Learn more and start staking at marinade.finance. Welcome to The Index. I'm your host, Alex Kehaya, and today I'm joined by my friend Austin Federa, co-founder of the DoubleZero Foundation and formerly working at Solana Labs. DoubleZero is building a decentralized high-performance network designed to power the future of blockchain. Austin, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And I guess I should say, it's not just Solana Labs, it's also the Solana Foundation. You were kind of like a Swiss Army knife there. You did a lot of communication stuff, but also just did basically everything. And just for everybody who doesn't know, like we work together there at the foundation, so we've known each other for a little while. I want to get into DoubleZero. It's one of my favorite projects of all time for a lot of reasons, and we can talk about that. But first, I want to know, why did you leave your awesome job at the Solana Foundation to go start a company and do all the really hard things that are required to build something like DoubleZero? Like what gets you out of bed in the morning to do this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that there's a whole bunch of things that kind of conspired at the same time. One of the big ones, without a doubt, was you have this like period of time in your life when you can be a founder, and I don't think it's actually that wide of a slice of your life. And there's different times for different people, and once you've done it, you can keep doing it. But there's a very narrow band to start it. There's people who get the bug at like 18 and they've got it in them and they've got to go try it, and they usually fail, but then sometimes they come back later and try it. But that entry period I feel like is actually pretty narrow, and it was something that I'd had in my head for a while, but I was sort of had this idea of I'll probably never be a founder. And the reason I had that sense was yeah. So I've heard this from a lot of people who've known me for a while. They were like, oh, I knew you were going to do something. And I was like, but like you would have asked me 2 years ago, I was like, no way. And the no way was because I am naturally a skeptical person. I think it's part of why I'm a pretty decent investor. I think it's part of why I was valuable to an organization like the Solana Foundation, is how something like the counterculture bet is usually the bet I'm willing to take, or at least the bet I'm willing to argue in a situation. And there is just a singular belief in the vision of the thing that you're building that a founder has to have. And, so Solana was not my first, Web3 stint. I got involved in 2017 working for Republic, helped them build Republic Crypto, then went to work for Bison Trails up until their acquisition by Coinbase to become Coinbase Cloud. And so I'd seen a lot of sort of the lifestyle aesthetic crypto founder, which is still sort of prevalent in the industry. We've washed them out for the most part compared to 2021. But there's still these people who sort of, they want the idea of being a founder, but they don't necessarily actually want to be one. They sort of find a product that fits what they think they can build. And I think that's just the wrong reason to become a founder. And so I'd had opportunities where people had invited me to come found a company with them. And I was always just skeptical. I was like, I think this thing will do well. I would invest in it. I don't know if I have enough conviction in this idea to devote my 24/7 to it. And I did have enough conviction in Solana to devote my 24/7 to it. At Solana, you can joke, oh, Solana took 4 years of my life. Well, they were incredible years. Even like the collapse of FTX and like, the market tanking and people being like, is Sol going to exist anymore? Like, it's weird to say I look back fondly on those days, but there's a portion of that was like deeply meaningful, impactful work of like, man, I'm like not only making a difference, but like I'm pretty good at this thing. And so the question is, why leave that? And really what it came down to is the idea of DoubleZero wouldn't get out of my head. That it was this infectious idea that sort of starts to slowly take over your every waking moment. And if you feel that, that's when you should go be a founder.
I love that. I want to say, one of the things I love best about you is your skepticism and your ability to express that in a really productive way. Like you've never, like this is one of the things at our time working together at the foundation that I loved, is that you were actually one of the few people in the room that would be like, meh, I don't think that's going to work, and like really stick to that, but in a productive way. And I think I think in startups generally, like in life generally, it's hard to do. It's really difficult to do well, is to actually express that skepticism and actually be right and not just be like a naysayer. And I don't think you are like that at all. And I think that's why everybody around you is kind of like, oh yeah, he's pretty good at this. Like, why wouldn't he just start a company? But I do see what you're saying. And I think your point about timing and like the time in life of when you can do it is also really poignant. It's easier when you're younger and you don't have kids. I've got 3. It's extremely hard to like build a family and build a startup. And then, the amount of time you put into it is enormous. It's basically your whole life. And the last thing I'll say about the Solana Foundation and just working in between labs and the foundation, I think there are very few places that have the magic with the right leadership that enables people like you and me to want to be there and have that freedom to roam. Like, I feel like I couldn't have been anywhere else where I got to do the kinds of things and take the kinds of swings that we got to take, for better or for worse. That's unique. And I think that's why it's attracted so many good people to be there.
Yeah. I mean, the ability to, especially in 2020 and not 2020. I joined at the very end of 2020. So in 2021 and 2022, to work, for Raj and Toli was really just this incredible front row experience to raising $315 million, to dealing with like, how do we launch our first conference in the middle of COVID when vaccines have just come out, and like, okay, we can do something in person again. How do we do that? What should we do? To navigating kind of these crazy run-ups in the bull market and negotiations with exchanges that are trying to kill you and all of this type of stuff. And from that experience, there's kind of 2 things that like you can take away. One is like, oh, I can go do this. And that wasn't my first assumption. My first assumption was like, I see how I can be very valuable in a situation where I'm working with exceptional people who just don't have enough hours in the day. And that is one of the really, really powerful, good pieces of having worked at Solana Labs and Solana Foundation. It's just like they're an exceptional founding team from that project. And to that sliver of time, it's also like, I want to have kids someday, right? And one of the things that Aaron Henshaw, who was my old boss at Bison Trails, sort of said to me was like, I wasn't a good dad while I was building Bison Trails. He's like, he was a great dad, of course, right? But he wasn't the dad he wanted to be. And for when his kids were really young, and he sort of looked at this, and this is why he decided not to go do a third company after Bison Trails, was like, there's actually things I really want to be around for. And, no matter how good and how much he was showing up, it's not the same, because this is an 18-hour job. And even if you're not doing it, your brain's working on it. And that was really impactful for me when I was kind of thinking about that. I was like, okay, so like, if I really want to go be a founder, like, I got to think about when in my life I'm going to have kids also, and make sure that those 2 things are compatible enough. Because like Raj and Toli did it, or, Toli did it with kids. Raj now has a kid, but it was after they'd sort of reached escape velocity. And I think that's just a really important component to like keep in mind, is like, you can't sacrifice your life for the other parts of your life.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true. And that's speaking from experience on my end. So what about DoubleZero gave you the conviction? Like, let's dig a little bit deeper into like what DoubleZero actually is and why it was so inspiring. That you said, I want to sign up for 18-hour days and basically the rest of my life for the near future.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the idea of DoubleZero really came out of the work that Anza and Firedancer were doing on building a validator client that could do 1 million transactions per second, or 2 validator clients in this case that could do 1 million transactions per second. And that was the work of Firedancer and Agave. And realizing and sitting down with engineers back in 2022 and then being like, yeah, we can build a validator client that'll do 1 million transactions per second, but you'll never actually get that in real life. And I was like, well, why is that? Like, is this just a standard overhead problem? Like, oh, my Wi-Fi says it's 8.4 gigabits per second, but like somehow my Zoom call is stuttering. And they're like, no, it's not that. It's that the public internet just is too slow to support this. And I was like, okay, interesting. So why are we doing all this work? And they're like, well, we'll figure it out someday. The internet will get faster slowly. And I didn't love that answer, but I didn't really have a solution for it at the moment. And then, you fast forward to the beginning or sort of the spring of last year, and Kevin Bowers comes to me and says, "Hey, I know you've been kicking around this new internet thing. There's these two guys, one of them I used to work with, who are also trying to work on this project, Andrew McConnell and Mateo Ward. You should chat with them." And so he made an introduction, and the major thing that was holding me back was, at the time, I didn't know much about high performance networking. I hadn't worked for NASDAQ. I hadn't worked for, a high frequency trading firm. I'd never run a global fiber network. All I knew is these things seem important, and there's no traditional finance firm in the world that would be caught dead using the public internet. So why are we using it for all of blockchain? And so meeting these guys and saying they've spent their entire career building high performance networks for financial use cases and other use cases. They actually have the skills, the network, the hiring network, which is a really big component that I think people underestimate when they're starting a new company, is can you hire the 15 people you need to hire within 6 months or not? And it was just
so hard.
Yeah, it just turned out to be the right collection of people.
Yeah, everybody who works for me at my company, we've known for 30 or 40 years between one of the founders, and that's just that's how we were able to land everybody. So talk more about how the public internet actually works today. My connection to this goes back to when I started working in crypto at Orchid, and we were building this decentralized VPN company. And I thought if I could get a node in every data center on the planet, then we'd have the most censorship-resistant VPN company in the world. And in talking to a bunch of data centers, I was learning about the backbone of the internet. And there's something I think it's is it 40 or 400 people with the license to actually have a connection to the internet? Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that the number? I can't remember what the number is, but that's the public internet. Is these this cabal of people that you just don't realize.
Yeah, it's kind of funny where it's the real world government is actually ICANN. It's pretty funny. So there's actually, if you think about it, there's only about 20 tier 1 ISPs in the world. And a tier 1 ISP is someone who has a global network that bridges a continent. And so that's AT&T, Verizon. In Japan, it's NTT. There's not that many of these. There's only about 20 of them. And then you can go down to your regional carriers that maybe service the Midwest or the Northeast, RCN or something like that. And then sometimes you're even getting down to local carriers, especially in smaller markets where it's this is an ISP specific to Montana or, something along those lines. But the tier 1 ISPs are the ones that really have all the power in these markets, and they're the ones that set all the peering arrangements. And so if you think about it, everyone's oh, it's great that you can run an Ethereum node at home in your basement. This means Ethereum is really decentralized. Well, it's on one level, sure, but it's not necessarily censorship resistant. And the reason it's not necessarily censorship resistant is so I live in New York. I am very lucky in that I can get 2 different ISPs in my house.
Wild. Yeah, I can only get one.
That is not the case for most of the United States.
Well, I can get technically now with Starlink. I can get 2. Technically with Starlink, I could put Starlink.
Okay, yes, I wasn't counting Starlink. So
both places I own homes, it's only one traditional ISP and then Starlink. That's it. I literally just got Starlink on one of my properties because the traditional ISP that was there was so terrible. And I tried 8 times to get them to fix my internet, and it just never worked.
And they don't have to fix it because they basically have a monopoly. And God bless Elon for this, but it's one of these things where you really don't have many options when you're talking about connectivity. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, if the government really goes after my node running on a shoebox in my basement, the problem isn't that it's running in a data center. The problem is that it's got one internet connection, and what we've seen from China is the Great Firewall of China is pretty good, and if the government tells AT&T to block all Ethereum nodes, you better believe they're going to do it. They gave the NSA a tap on all of our information back in 2001. So these companies, they are the major censorship point and choke point. And so part of the point of DoubleZero is to work around them by creating parallel infrastructure that operates on dedicated connections where we can go faster than the public internet allows. We can do direct routing, unlike with the public internet where your data is routed all over the place. And we can have more censorship-resistant networks because these networks are now no longer in the residential internet area, they're in commercial information services spaces. So even if we're building a decentralized distributed protocol with multiple independent contributors to the fiber links like we are, under the scenes, there are companies that own either leases or licenses or ownership rights on these pieces of fiber, and they really can't monkey with ours without monkeying with Jumps and Citadels and Amazons and Googles and Microsofts and OpenAIs. And so you kind of have this like enhanced censorship resistance by the fact that you're no longer on the residential side of the house, you're on the enterprise side of the house, even though we're using this technology to support distributed and decentralized systems.
Help me understand here. Like you've got multiple people, entities that are laying fiber in the ground.
So today, we actually don't have anyone laying net new fiber. That is like a $100 million activity.
Yeah. But that's the plan, though. Like, is that where you go eventually? Like the market, the economy.
If the protocols,
if it's big enough, yeah.
The economics of this work the same as the economics of anything, which is like, hey, if there's enough customers in this specific area, someone's going to run fiber for it. And they're going to do that at their own cost, right? The government's not subsidizing fiber install costs or something along those lines. And so what we are basically doing here and going through is working with contributors who have access to fiber already. And so I mentioned we have 11 companies contributing fiber to the network at the moment. That's everything from Jump and DRW, Cumberland, down to TerraSwitch and Latitude and Cherry servers, to VCs that are actually taking leases on fiber to contribute to the DoubleZero network and sort of earn rewards and become contributors in that sense. And that's kind of the whole process that we're under with this thing. So we have built the only high-performance network in the world that has multiple independent contributors to it. Everything else is like Jump runs their own network, Citadel runs their own network, DRW runs their own network, Galaxy runs their own network. But in this case, they're all coming together under this basically consortium model, which is really blockchains at the end of the day. They're giant digital cooperatives, and no one sort of thinks of them as a co-op, but it is a modern digital co-op. And that really has enabled us to build, our mainnet, which is launching on September 30th. That includes, 50 different fiber connections into 18 different locations worldwide. And so that really is greatly expanding where you can run nodes, and it's offering, anywhere between 20 to 100 times the capacity of bandwidth that exists on a typical node today.
Wow. And so just from a pure cost analysis standpoint, have you done the math on what it would cost you to go acquire that yourself versus building this kind of consortium model? Like a company that just say wanted to have 50 connections, like how much would that cost them to get? I mean, they probably couldn't.
Yeah, so each connection, can cost several months of time in terms of source citing. So one of our engineers, his previous job was building out a global high-frequency network for a large trading firm, and that was basically 2 years of his life and his entire team's life, was going out and doing site selection and location, getting leases on these fiber, negotiating power, negotiating rack space, dealing with people who don't speak English, right? When you want to build a global network, surprise, there's a lot of languages out there in the world. And the folks who are running and operating data centers, they didn't all, go to American boarding school and speak English. So you have to deal with this, and that there's local laws and regulations, and it's a pretty intensive process. And so one way to think of what we're doing over the long term is the revolution of the cloud was as much a business model revolution as a technology revolution. It was the idea that instead of going and calling up your guy and saying, hi, I need 40 new servers, and he goes, great, send me 150 grand and they'll be ready in 3 weeks. You just show up at Amazon with a credit card, and 15 minutes later, you've got 40 modern servers ready to do whatever you want to do. And that's the type of experience we are bringing to users, both Solana validators and others who say, in the future, hey, I need 50 gigabits per second of connectivity between this data center and this data center, and they're both on DoubleZero, and I can just go and pay for this in tokens and never talk to a person and just transmit my data between these two.
Yeah, I think one thing you just said there really resonates with me, never talking to a human and just using tokens. This was my first experience in crypto, was taking like $1,000 and just collateralizing it on Ethereum. And I didn't have to talk to a human being to get a loan. And this is kind of the same concept. It's a big step change in the business model, and it increases the velocity at which people are able to interact with that ecosystem because it's permissionless. You just use it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, with mainnet Solana, I keep seeing this uptick in how much of the stake is like validators are using DoubleZero. I think last time I saw it was like 16 or 18% or something. What's the latest number? And like, what does that actually mean as far as the validators running DoubleZero on their node? What are they doing?
Yeah, so we're, at this point we're in a transition. So we're talking on, September 16th. And so right now we're transitioning from testnet to mainnet beta. And so we're actually in process, today we have, I think about 52 Solana mainnet validators that are actually migrated over from the DoubleZero testnet to DoubleZero mainnet. And this is really big because testnet is only 8 locations and 8 pieces of fiber, and our mainnet is much, much larger. And so we expect to see significantly higher performance for all these validators and, even more folks coming and joining the network.
So they're running their internet connections are going through the fiber networks, like
yeah, exactly. So the way that this works, I don't know how technical you want to get on this episode.
Keep going.
Okay, so the way that this works is we have these DoubleZero devices, which are switches. Right now we're using Arista 7130s and 7280s, and we'll be qualifying new platforms over time that are sitting in data centers, and they're connected via fiber to other switches all around the world. That creates the physically interconnected DoubleZero network. If your validator is, let's say we have fiber in AM2 and you're in like a different data center in Amsterdam or even in AM2, you're connecting in via a GRE tunnel, which is you download this piece of software in your validator, you create a connection into the DoubleZero network, and so you have a public internet connection and a DoubleZero connection at the same time. And so the routes that are accessible on DoubleZero, like other validators on DoubleZero, your traffic will all be routed through DoubleZero to get there. If the validator is not accessible on DoubleZero, let's say it's running on the public internet in just some other data center, then you'll just use the public internet to connect in. And so these validators always have the ability to fail over to the public internet if there happens to be some sort of problem in DoubleZero or a link goes down or something along those lines. And so there always is this backup of just using the public internet. We think that's really important for the safety and security of networks. Now, Solana may have to build a safe mode at some point where if DoubleZero goes down, they fail back to doing only a measly 5,000 transactions per second, as opposed to the 500,000 they're doing on DoubleZero. But that safe mode is exactly as intended, right? You want systems to fail gracefully without failing catastrophically. And so that's kind of the way that the interconnects all work today. Over time, we are likely going to be, integrating other ways to connect into the network as well as direct cabling if there's people who want to do that. But that's kind of the vision and the process for this thing.
Very cool. And so all that makes sense. And I think like even at 5,000, we're still doing billions of transactions per day on the network. So it can still support, a lot of use cases just faster. It's like a Ferrari if you're using DoubleZero.
Yes.
My question to you about the token is like, how is that it's used to pay for routing things over the network? Am I correct in like who's the one like actually using the token to pay for things?
Yeah, so this is kind of a really interesting component. I didn't want a Solana validator to have to maintain a separate DoubleZero token balance. And the reason for this is quite simple. We've seen centralized sequencers on Ethereum run out of ETH and stop posting blocks because someone forgot to top up a wallet. There's 6,000 nodes on Solana. Like, someone will forget every single day and we'll be kicking RPCs and validators off if we do that. So instead, we work on a model where they can divert a portion of their SOL earnings to the DoubleZero network, and then we swap those into DoubleZero token, and that basically pays their fee. And so this works on a percentage of revenue model. And we think that's the right way to align long-term incentives because it means that there's win-win on both sides as we make validators more profitable and we make validators more, just like they get to build more profitable blocks. The Solana Foundation is able to raise CUs from 100 million to 200 million because suddenly we have more capacity to propagate state. All these things come into play together to basically make validators, our North Star is making validators more money.
Yep.
And so, one of the cool pieces about this is this allows us to basically scale out to other types of blockchain systems as well, including RPCs and those type of systems that pay on a more traditional pay-per-request model. But those rewards that come in, about 50% of them are just destroyed as a Sybil resistance mechanism, similar to how Solana does this with base fees. And the others are distributed out to the people providing fiber, the network contributors, as rewards. The cool part is, maybe I can take a step back, proof of stake only makes sense for networks that have persistent value stored on them. So on Solana, you have not only a lot of SOL, but you have a lot of USDC, you have a lot of Bonk, you have a lot of Jupe, you have a lot of all these other different types of tokens that exist on the network. And so a validator needs to provide persistent security for assets on that network. DoubleZero is what's known as a stateless network. All you're securing is data in flight for the period of time for which it's in flight. We're providing momentary security. You can sort of the silly analogy here is people who don't trust Tether and think Tether is going to go to zero. You shouldn't be worried about passing through Tether as an intermediary coin on the way to your bank account, because the odds that, it's sort of like driving over like a bridge in Soviet Russia. The chances it falls while you're driving across it are very low, even if the chances that the bridge falls sometime in the next 5 years are quite high. And so what we are securing is something very different. And that way we have this interesting model called proof of utility. And proof of utility is based on Shapley values. And this is sort of a mathematical and economic concept of how much worse would a system be if you remove a particular component from that system. And so this is basically, the reward model looks very similar to Bitcoin at that point. So if you have 50% or 10% of the hash power of Bitcoin, you will get 10% of the rewards, irrespective of whether you own one Bitcoin or you're Michael Saylor. We want to mirror those same economic dynamics on DoubleZero because it incentivizes competition between providers. So if you have let's say the second fastest link along a particular route, if you can find a way to make your link faster, you will actually be able to eclipse the contributor who's ahead of you by making your link faster and therefore earn more rewards than they will, irrespective of how many tokens you hold.
Super interesting. So yeah, it's almost like proof of work.
Yes.
But obviously it has it's not using the same kind of algorithm or whatever to verify what block was produced or something. I mean, it's not even, how do you prove the utility? How do you actually track that?
So we get telemetry from all of the switches and hardware devices that get stored on something called the DoubleZero ledger. And the DoubleZero ledger, it is a blockchain, but it's not one that you're ever going to be able to deploy a smart contract to or anything. It's just that blockchain is the most perfect system of accounting humanity has ever created. And it's a database that you can't go in and retroactively change things without leaving a record that you've monkeyed with something. And so we use this to sort of have this public telemetry. And I should also say, we have no passive emission rewards on DoubleZero. So if you just are providing fiber and no one's using it, you're going to get no rewards on that piece of fiber. And so we know, hey, Alex's node is sitting in this data center connected into DoubleZero through this device, and it has 1% of Solana stake on it or something like that. And so we can assign a value of every network that you pass through in your process of gossiping and communicating and turbining with the rest of the Solana cluster, and therefore we can assign a value relative to each link you pass through. And that number is derived based on your performance, not your performance, the network contributor's performance relative to the public internet. So if someone's providing fiber that is no faster than the public internet, they're not going to get rewarded really for that, because that doesn't beat our benchmark standard, which is the public internet. What's nice about this is also, as the public internet gets faster, contributors have to do more to justify the rewards that they're taking in.
When all of this ties right back into the whole internet capital markets narrative, and I think you are very well positioned for what's about to happen. I really believe people underestimate what's going to happen for high throughput blockchains, and I do think it's not a winner takes all, but I think it's a winner takes most of the market, and just the market is massive. It's like many trillions of dollars of assets that are coming on chain, and we just had the NASDAQ be like, yeah, we're going on chain. I don't know if that's happening on Solana or not, but I do know that there are pretty good signs of product market fit for things like equities on chain and other real world assets. And all of those things need this high throughput network. So there's going to be a lot of people are going to be willing to pay for that. They're going to be willing to pay. And we know that's true because they've already been doing this for years with things like JITO and MEV and like paying enormous amounts just to get a transaction to land ahead of everybody else. So it's a new business model, but it's also not completely reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the public equities market as well. You know, the amount of money that high frequency trading firms pay to access high performance networks is huge. The networks that many of these companies build and operate cost upwards of $20 million a year, if not more, just in their sort of operation, let alone all the R&D and custom IP that they're developing to get an edge over their competitors. It's a very cutthroat market because there's so much profit to be made.
So we're getting towards the top of the show here, and I always ask this. What have I not asked you that I should have asked?
It's a good question. I think we've covered a ton today. I guess I would say it's sort of like the long-term vision of this thing. We would like to eventually get rid of IP addresses.
Okay.
Because you think about it, like, I don't actually want to talk to an IP address. I want to talk to the cryptographic signature located at the end of that IP address. And so, we have the technology nowadays to do public key, private key handshake routing, which removes certificate authorities, it removes DNS, it removes all of these centralized intermediaries that right now are major points of censorship on the public internet. And so think
that's a wild idea.
Yeah, but like, why not, right? Like when I'm trying to talk to, let's say like a Coinbase exchange deposit address, I'm not going like coinbase.com/my-wallet. I'm picking a cryptographic signature. And what is a blockchain doing? It is effectively a router that's routing that ownership of tokens from one point to another. Now, it's very different when we're talking about how that would operate with billions of devices. But at the end of the day, like the security paradigm of public key, private key cryptography feels to me like the right way to do routing on a global network where we have, how many times do you get spoofed emails from, someone pretending to be Coinbase?
I know. This is what I was going to say. It makes me feel a lot safer, right? Like every time I try to do a transaction through a web interface, I'm like so paranoid.
Right. You're like, what is this? How do I know this is actually, what it actually says it is? And it's like, okay, well, I'm trusting this certificate sitting in the middle. Okay, great. But you know what has gotten hacked before? Certificate authorities.
Yes.
And there are actually reputation scores for CAs.
Didn't we just see this with Genosis Safe? I mean, it wasn't the certificate authority that got it hacked, but like one of their engineers' computers got compromised and then they swapped out the website. And then and that's the kind of thing, like if you were just talking to a cryptographic signature to send the money somewhere, you would never get swapped out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like if you're talking to a cryptographic signature, it's going to that cryptographic signature. And so that's kind of one of the things we think would be interesting for the long term, because then the client and the server, or the client and the client, however you want to talk about them in this peer-to-peer world, can send a response back. And that response that you get back cannot be faked unless that private key has been stolen.
So this episode is going to come out day of the 30th. So congrats, you've launched by the time people listen to this.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, hopefully. And if not, it's coming out whatever day we ship this episode. So tell me how people listening to this can get involved. Like, where can they find DoubleZero? Just a little call to action.
Yeah. So doublezero.xyz is our website, at DoubleZero on Twitter. I think the main thing is if you run a Solana validator and you want to get connected, we're open. We'd love you to come and join and connect to the network and see the performance that you can get on DoubleZero. But the other piece too is like, this is like a call to action for the entire Solana community. That's like, do we as a group want to say we can go faster than what the public internet lets us do? And if the answer is yes, take the jump, join DoubleZero.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show, Austin. I appreciate it. And good luck on the launch.
Thank you.